Welcome back to the Last Days Book Club, where we're reading the book entitled Dwelling in the Secret Place by Sonica Veith. This is an ebook available online for free at clashofminds.com, where you can download it and read along with us. Sonica Veith is the spouse of well-known evangelist, lecturer, university professor, and zoologist, Dr. Walter Veith. And this true story is a chronicle of their life together, their ministry, their numerous trials, tribulations, and hardships, as well as their successes, victories, and triumphs. In our last reading, we covered chapter 12, entitled, Let No Man Deceive You, where once again the Veiths face a roller coaster of events that both severely try and justify their faith. First, there was a knock on their door at midnight, where a local Freemason member shoved a large book into Walter's hand, saying that he would return for it at 4 a.m. The book was a treasure trove of secret society information, which gave Walter the ammunition he needed to give power and credibility to his lectures. Strangely, the man was soon arrested and imprisoned, and not heard from again. This brought home to them how serious the devil was, and how angry he is when exposed. Soon after, Walter was off to Canada for a series of lectures, and Sonica was left home alone. The devil again exercised his wrath on her for the work Walter was doing 6,000 kilometers away. First, she found the garage flooded under 6 inches of water one morning when she went to take the children to school. Turned out that a mole had eaten through the cement floor, bitten through the copper hot water pipe, and caused the flood. How possible was that? Then a little while later, she returned home from work for lunch and saw water pouring under the front door. This time, a pipe in the wall in the upstairs bathroom had burst, flooding the whole house. Then yet again, another day, 2 policemen knocked at the door to say a complaint had been brought against her by the neighbors for working on Sunday. The case was thrown out, and she never had to go to court. But it turned out that the neighbors were so angry at them for going to church on Saturday and not Sunday that they wanted to try and force them to work on Saturdays. How strange. Meanwhile, in Canada, Walter was presenting his lectures to a packed audience in a hall that seated, ironically, 1,260 people. The hall was full every night, except for 1 seat at the front. And each evening, a young Down syndrome boy would enter the hall and go straight to the seat, as if he knew it was there for him. At the end of the lectures, angry attendees would come onto the stage to confront Walter. But the boy would elbow his way through them, embrace Walter, and rest his head on his shoulder. At the sight of this, the angry crowd would dissipate. When the lectures ended, Walter presented another series at an Adventist church many miles away. Yet, the boy showed up there also. No parents, no guardians, no adults accompanying him. How did he make that long trip alone? When he came up to Walter at the end of the last lecture and hugged him as usual, Walter took him by the shoulders and asked him if he was an angel. The boy straightened up, looked up, and pointed heavenward. Then he disappeared into the crowd and was never seen again. Walter felt blessed that heaven was watching and protecting him. Back at home, one night, there was a ferocious knocking on their door, and their neighbor burst into the room, accusing them of stealing his wife's cat and sacrificing it, and demanding that they tell him where they had buried the body. Totally perplexed, they denied that they'd ever taken the cat, but he stormed out, still shouting and accusing them of animal sacrifice. A few days later, they found the cat in a drain pipe where there had been some construction. They cleaned it up, fed it, and left a note on the neighbor's door that they had found the cat and he could come to get it. Again, he stormed into their house, refusing to accept their explanation, and again accusing them of wanting to sacrifice the cat, but had not done so since he had frightened them from doing so. Again he stormed out of the house with the cat. Turns out that because they worshipped on Saturday, he thought they were a cult who conducted animal sacrifices. And finally, there was Clive and Elsa. These were both young people who had been coming to their home for Bible study and had become regulars, even sleeping over at times. But they both had health issues. Clive had epilepsy and Elsa asthma. Clive's parents were killed in a motorbike accident while he was young, and he grew up in foster homes with no one caring for him. Elsa lived with her mother and an uncle, whom she claimed molested her. It turned out that they both used their afflictions to manipulate not only the Veiths, but other friends and family members. One day, Sonica decided to confront Clive about it, and he turned and hissed at her that she was the devil and ran out of the house to his car and took off in a rage. A week later, they were told that he drowned, and shortly after, Elsa disappeared out of their lives. The devil had infiltrated their home and was trying to cause division and aggravation. But once again, God intervened, and they realized they had to put their trust in him and continue the work which Satan seemed determined to destroy. Dear listeners, don't forget, you can download this book for free from clashofminds.com as we pick up the story in chapter 13, entitled A New Era. Philippians 3, verses 13 and 14. Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forth unto those things which are before. I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. Chapter 13, A New Era. Although we had new vigor and plans for the future, our debt on the farm and the money we owed to my employer were pressing hard on us. I was trying to get as many hours of work done for him as I could, but still, we were struggling to keep our heads above water. The first loan we had on our property, being used to pay off our second bond on the house, was slowly running dry. My employer had been making more and more demands on Walter, many times ordering him to get yourself up here to my house immediately. I need to speak to you. One night, we were tired and despondent, and we knelt together, and Walter prayed, Lord, I know you said that we should avoid debt like the plague, and you know that I have not brought this situation upon myself. I now ask you to please help me, so that with these hands I will get my family out of debt. With these hands, my wife and I have built this house, and the only solution now is to sell it. I opened one eye to see if Walter was serious. He was serious. The very next day, we put the house on the market, and now I had the added burden of keeping everything tidy for people to view the house any time of the day. A house occupied by a scatterbrained professor, 3 teenagers, a German shepherd dog, cats and birds, not to mention our daughter's rat, and the scorpions, lizards, and snakes our youngest son brought home. Unfortunately, the property market was dead at that time, and hardly anyone came to view the house. We were disappointed and worried. After almost a year, there still seemed to be no interest in buying the house. During this time, my health started to deteriorate. For months, I had incessant stomach cramps, which kept us awake many nights. I was taken to hospital for scans, but found nothing which could cause the pain and nausea. When my fingers started to tingle and go numb and stiff, Walter knew something was seriously wrong. He had in the past read something about poisoning and phoned the poison department of the hospital, who confirmed that my symptoms probably pointed to arsenic poisoning. It then dawned on us that at my workplace, I was working with specimens that had been kept in bottles containing arsenic. Every time I opened a bottle to work with the content, I inhaled the fumes and handled the specimens with my bare hands. Needless to say, Walter insisted that I quit my job. I was very grateful to be released from that yoke and started to help Walter with preparing his lectures for an outreach series. Walter had photographed his own material worldwide, which he used in his lectures. A couple of times, he spent the last money we had on buying rolls of films for photos which he developed by himself in the darkroom at his university. It was out of the question to have all those thousands of slides developed. One night, he came home after a lecture, emptied his pockets, and found an envelope. When he opened it, there was the same amount of money he had just spent on the film he brought. He hadn't told anyone what he had paid, but God knew. Someone must have slipped the envelope into his pocket at the meeting without him noticing. This happened 3 times during that lecture series, and every time the gift covered the expense of the film he had brought. God had taken care of all our needs a little at a time, and just enough to teach us to step out in faith. Philippians 4:19, but my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus. But now technology had become more advanced, and the era of slides and slide projectors had come to an end. Walter was the first lecturer in South Africa to use PowerPoint for his lectures. But for that, he needed to scan his thousands of slides into the computer. We decided to take the house off the market and first finish the Lord's work. Then we would try again to sell the house after the campaign was over. During the day, I would sit and scan the slides for that evening's lecture into the computer. And in the evening, Walter would put everything together, drive to the hall, and give his presentation. It was extremely stressful for us, and everything depended on me getting it all done while my housework was piling up. A few weeks later, after we had taken the house off the market, while I was busy preparing for Walter's lecture in the series, there was a knock at the door early in the morning. Walter and the children had left a while ago, and I was sitting at the computer in my pajamas, busily scanning. Apprehensively, I cracked the door open, only to find the estate agent standing there, smiling sheepishly. "I'm so sorry to bother you, and I know you have taken your house off the market. But I have a client here who is very eager to see your house," she said. A million things rushed through my mind. The dishes were piled up in the sink. The children's beds were not made. The washing was waiting for me in the laundry. I was in my pajamas. And to top it all, the dog had been chasing the cat in the house. Mats were lying in crumpled heaps, and dog hairs had settled on everything. "I don't know," I stammered. "My house is in a state. Could you come later today?" The agent nodded and just started walking down the steps when I had the strong impression that I should call her back. "Okay, you can bring your client, but please don't look at the mess." For a painful few minutes that seemed like hours, the two ladies walked through the house and then left. "I'll never see them again," I sighed in shame. But to my surprise, that afternoon, the agent phoned me and made an appointment for the client to bring her whole family to view the house. By that time, I had everything in order, and that same day, she signed the offer to purchase the house. What a miracle. When we decided to put God's work first, He worked behind the scenes to answer our prayers. We now had the means to pay off all our debt and still have a little money to buy a small house. A very, very small house. Matthew 6, verse 33. "But seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." It was a sunny afternoon when the estate agent took us out to view some houses. After we had paid off all our debt, we had 340,000 rand left, but there was not much to find in that price range. There were some dilapidated homes in bad areas, and we were determined not to take a loan and go down the dark alley of debt again. We were beginning to lose hope, but then the agent decided to take us to view one more house. "I know the price is higher than you want to spend, but I just thought you would like to see it. The owner is moving to a retirement complex. He had an offer of 550,000 rand, but he rejected it." "Oh, that's far too much for us," Walter said. As we walked into the small home, I immediately liked it. There was an atrium full of beautiful orchids and some water features. While Walter and the agent were talking, I walked in the garden with the old man, admiring his lush garden. In one of the water ponds, I saw a chameleon struggling to stay afloat, desperately trying to reach the side. It must have fallen from the tree into the water. I picked it up, gave it a gentle stroke, and put it back up in the tree. We greeted the owner and drove back with the agent to her office. We were rather despondent, but then Walter said almost in a joke, "Make him an offer of 340,000 rand." "Oh no, that won't work," the agent said. "It will have to be more than 550. Just then, another agent overheard our conversation, and he said, "Just phone and ask Mr. Brown. Never say never." When our agent reluctantly phoned the old man and told him what our offer was, he first emphatically said no. Then he asked a strange question. "Who are the people? Is it the lady who saved the chameleon in my pond?" The estate agent looked puzzled and even irritated when she asked me if I had picked up a chameleon from his pond. I nodded, and she responded that it was me. "Well, in that case, they can have the house," the gentleman said with finality. Walter and I glanced at each other in disbelief. The agent was even more baffled. But in silence, she started preparing the papers for us to sign. That night, we prayed and thanked God once again for doing the impossible for us to own a house without incurring any debt. When we finally moved to the house, we asked our pastor and some elders to dedicate the house to God's work and to protect us from evil influences in our home. I felt so grateful to God for all He had done for us. And as I was reading the Bible, I came across some verses in Psalm 71, which brought great joy and encouragement to me and served to strengthen me for more trials that, unbeknownst to us, were lurking in the future. Psalm 71, starting at verse 19. Thy righteousness also, O God, is very high. Who hath done great things, O God? Who is like unto thee? Thou which hast showed me great and sore troubles, shall quicken me again, and shall bring me up again from the depths of the earth. Thou shalt increase my greatness and comfort me on every side. I will also praise thee with the psaltery, even thy truth, O my God. Unto thee will I sing with the harp, O thou Holy One of Israel. Psalm 71, verses 19 through 22. My thoughts went back to my childhood, when I escaped from the evil world around me and found God by singing in a deserted little chapel all to myself. God had not forgotten our first encounter. I suddenly felt prompted to start writing my own songs and make my own music, and I solemnly vowed that I would use the ability and the means He gives me for His work only. Soon I had a small studio in our house, and many happy hours were spent writing, singing, and recording my songs for God. I once again found peace in dwelling in the secret place of the Most High and abiding in the shadow of the Almighty. It was here, in the secret place of prayer, that Jesus Himself found divine strength while on earth. In a world of sin, Jesus endured struggles and torture of soul. In communion with God, He could unburden the sorrows that were crushing Him. Here, He found comfort and joy. Desire of Ages, page 362, paragraph 4. And here, I shared my hardships and worries, but also my passion for the beauty of His creation and His music. Psalm 71, verse 23. My lips shall greatly rejoice when I sing unto Thee, and my soul, which Thou hast redeemed. It was late afternoon when our youngest son, Robert, came stumbling into the house. "I don't feel well," he said faintly. "Don't know what's wrong. I feel like I'm dying, and I have pain in my left arm." Pain in the left arm. And he was only 19. We knew that something serious was wrong. We rushed him to hospital, and while still in the car, he became unconscious. The doctor at emergency checked his heart rate, and it was more than 300 beats per minute. Thinking that he was having a heart attack, the doctor gave him adrenaline, which was the worst thing to do, and caused him to have a seizure. His body was tossed from side to side, which ripped out the tubes to his lungs, and I saw blood oozing from his mouth. Then his heart stopped beating. At this time, the doctors asked me to leave the room, and I was alone and confused outside in the dark corridor, wondering if he was dead. I longed to be with him, but understandably, the last thing a doctor in that position needs is a hysterical mother. But God had miraculously preserved his life. After they had shocked the heart, it started beating again, and he gained consciousness. And soon he was talking to us as if nothing had happened. After extensive tests, it was discovered that he must have been born with Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, which often only manifests around the age of 19. Since there were only 2 electrocardiologists in the country at the time, and both were at a congress overseas, we had to monitor Robert 20 hours a day. We made him a bed next to ours in our bedroom, where he remained for a week until the surgeon was able to eliminate the large offending nerve in his heart that caused all the trouble. For months afterwards, we had to monitor him regularly until his heart had healed completely. But we had scarcely recovered from one traumatic experience when the next wave of pressure was again upon us. Invitations for Walter to speak in different countries were overwhelming. Many people had watched his Total Onslaught series and were eager to meet the crazy German who gave a straight message to all, should it be the Queen of England, his own church, or even the Pope. We were inundated with letters and messages, and we knew it was impossible for him to answer God's call and at the same time be at the university. After discussing it with his colleagues and students, he decided to take a year's unpaid leave to travel the world and speak in all the different countries where he was invited. Our faith in God's financial provision and care and his protection were once again to be tested. At that time, our oldest son and his wife had emigrated to Canada. Our daughter was in England, and our youngest son was studying engineering. It was therefore possible for me to travel with Walter to support him for the many months that he would be away from home. Our flights were long, and we arrived tired and jet-lagged at every destination, but the Lord sustained us all the way. What made it more difficult was the reception we received in the different places. Someone from the German conference somehow got hold of our itinerary and wrote messages to all the churches before we would even arrive there, warning them against Walter and telling the pastor not to let him speak because he was dangerous and not a member of the church in good and regular standing. Every time we arrived at a church, there would be tension initially until the pastor realized that the rumors were untrue. Most of the time, the conferences would not support the series, and the president of the conference involved would often refuse to meet Walter. Messages from the conferences would even be sent out to all the other churches, warning them and even forbidding the members to attend the meetings. What puzzled us was that even though his itinerary was not advertised, someone knew when and where he would be next. Was there a mole somewhere? But once again, we had nothing to fear. God had prepared the way, in spite of the efforts of the enemy to stop the work he had planned. The members received us with open arms, and the support was overwhelming. People from different Adventist churches, as well as atheists, many unchurched, and some from other Protestant churches, flocked to the meetings and blessed us with their presence and their interesting life stories. One of the several speaking appointments Walter had was in the USA, in the city of Tulsa in Oklahoma. We had no idea that this was a predominantly Freemason city. We watched in amazement as the Freemason compass and square sign lit up on the brake lights every time the cars in front of us stopped. And even more astounding was the same sign on many police stations. Excitedly, Walter asked our driver to take us to one of the many Mason lodges, where he spent some hours taking photographs of the pictures of famous people, many of them being 32 or 33-degree Freemasons. Having studied the secret books of Freemasonry, Walter knew that most of what they believed and did was hidden, and it was no surprise to us that we were not allowed into certain parts of the lodge. The tour guide kept a stern eye on us and would not let us leave the group, but Walter managed to slip away unnoticed while I was asking the man some questions. This new information made Walter determined to warn the audience at the meetings about the dangers of Freemasonry, but the organizers of the churches were adamant that it would upset the guests and they wouldn't come back to the meetings. Walter, however, continued with his series as usual, undeterred by criticism, and the audience just grew larger every night. At the end of the series, many of the visitors, men and women, came forward and testified that they were Freemasons and that they had decided to leave the order and never go back again. They thanked us for revealing the truth to them and brought us their Mason regalia, their aprons, badges, headgear, and books. The once skeptical Adventists were amazed and beamed with joy when these souls signed up for Bible studies. Although we didn't know what happened to them when we left, we continued to pray for their safety. A long, hard road lay ahead for them, and they needed the protective care of Jesus to fight the battle against families and leaders of their communities and to follow their convictions. We subsequently visited other cities where Walter took more pictures and gathered more information at Masonic lodges for his lectures. In Washington, he found the shrine of Albert Pike with all his Masonic regalia, and in many other lodges, the pictures of the presidents of America and the astronauts were proudly displayed, all with their own signatures and 33 degrees behind their names. Soon, our time in the United States was up, and we were taken to the airport to fly to our next destination. It was cold and wet when we arrived in Germany. The church was packed with interested brothers and sisters who had heard about the German-speaking South African throwing the proverbial cat amongst the pigeons. This time, the cat was his recent research on the controversial health message. At that stage, Germany had very little of the vast collection of Spirit of Prophecy books available that had been translated into German. Much of what Walter was preaching they had never read or heard before, and it elicited an aggressive reaction from some brothers in the medical field. One doctor jumped up during Walter's lecture when he explained about prions and mad cow disease and started to shout into a microphone which he had set up prior to the lecture. It was clear that he had come prepared for a war. There was silence in the hall, and no one dared to look at the man. "You're a liar," he shouted angrily. "There is no such thing as a prion. Who ever heard of prion disease?" From the stage, Walter calmly started to quote from the publications he had referred to. It was still fresh in his memory, since he had just recently finished writing his book, Diet and Health, New Scientific Perspectives. Some of the others also started to join in the shouting match, but soon they had nothing to say against the evidence that Walter presented. The seed was planted, and some years later, when Walter was in Germany again, that very brother walked up to Walter and told him that what he had preached was the truth, and asked for forgiveness. Walter was very happy to have another medical brother on board. Though at the time it was traumatic for us to witness the resistance from our own people, we later understood that the Lord was teaching us to persist and not be afraid to speak the truth. 2 Chronicles 15 and verse 7. "Be ye strong, therefore, and let not your hands be weak, for your work shall be rewarded." Our next appointment with the people of God was in the beautiful historical city Prague in the Czech Republic. A few days before we had to leave Germany, I got miserably sick with the flu, and when we arrived at the border, I was so weak with fever that I struggled to get out of the car. Coming from Africa, we didn't have the right clothing or the knowledge to survive the European winters. Outside, it was snowing and bitterly cold, and all around us were guards with their rifles pointed at us. They were barking some commands at us, but we understood nothing. I had heard many stories of innocent travelers who were detained in prisons of East Bloc countries for no valid reason, and I started shaking even more. But fortunately, Ven spoke Czech, and eventually we got our papers and passports checked, and we were free to go. Arriving at the church, we met with another challenge. The pastor did not seem to want to be involved in the meetings and gave us the cold shoulder. Furthermore, the church had organized a translator, but halfway into the lecture, the translator put down his microphone and walked off the stage. He was no longer willing to translate the messages that Walter was presenting. An uncomfortable silence fell over the audience, but then the conference president bravely stood up and said he would continue to translate. During the day, we would explore the ancient city with its interesting architecture, its cobbled walkways, and many cathedrals. Walter noticed a Jesuit cathedral and wanted to go inside to take pictures. But when we went inside, we were told that no photographs were allowed and that we had to pay a fee to go beyond the foyer area. We decided that Walter would pay and I would wait in the foyer behind the chained barrier. As I tried to take my camera from my neck to return it to the camera bag, I accidentally pushed the button and the flash went off. Immediately, one of the Jesuit guards came storming towards me with angry gestures, shouting, "No photo! No photo!" I tried to explain that it was an accident, but he grabbed me by my arm and marched me out the door. The other guard joined him with a withering look and some incomprehensible reprimanding words as I was pushed down the stairs into the street. I felt humiliated and tried to make myself invisible to the hostile looks of the passers-by. It was cold outside, and I wondered what kept Walter so long. My thoughts were drawn to our kind brothers and sisters in the faith back home, and I shuddered to think what it must be like to have to live and survive in such an evil atmosphere, and to think that martyrs in the Middle Ages were locked up and tortured in the dungeons below these cathedrals for many years. After a while, Walter appeared in the door and came rushing down the stairs towards me. "I just got the most amazing pictures in there," he whispered, as he took my arm and walked me quickly down the street. "How did you do that? You're not allowed to take photos in there. They will lock you up," I said anxiously. "Well, when they threw you out, I quickly took a whole bunch of pictures." He was so thrilled with his achievement that he didn't notice my indignant look. "And it never crossed your mind to come to my rescue like any good husband would do?" "No," he laughed. "I'm so glad I brought you along. I could not have done it without you," he said with a teasing smile, and turned into a narrow side street in search of more exciting findings. Oh well, it was worth being humiliated for the Lord's work, I thought. Count it all joy when ye fall into diverse temptations. One evening, after the last lecture, the skeptical pastor came to Walter, and to his surprise, he thanked him for his lectures. "I now realize that these lectures are important and that this is the truth," he said. "Oh, that's good to hear," Walter smiled. "What made you change your mind?" "My grandmother, who also attended the lectures, said to me the other night, 'Now I can die, because I know that the Advent truth is still alive.'" What a blessing to serve the Almighty God, who cares for every soul and does everything possible to save us from our unbelief. We were relieved to land in Valencia, Spain, where it was decidedly warmer than Eastern Europe. Beautiful orange groves decorated the landscape, and there was still some fruit hanging on the trees. As we were driving to a small town where we would be staying for the week, we noticed sad-looking old people staring at us with empty eyes from the dark alleys, awkwardly bent over from years of hardships and labor. Some were kissing and bowing before statues of Mary and other Catholic saints on the streets, and unknowingly drawing the upside-down cross on their head and chest. Our hearts went out to these souls in bondage, who believed that their salvation was through the church, the Pope, and the priests, and that they have to confess to a mere man, and in fear of damnation, do penance for their sins. They have been kept ignorant of their true Savior Jesus Christ, who is the only way, the truth, and the life. John 14 and verse 6. Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. The home we were to stay in for the next few days was a lovely rustic villa some distance from a small town at the sea. It was still early in the morning. The owners were at work, and we were alone. From our window, we had the full view over the landscape, and Walter, restless as always, wanted to explore the area. "Let's go for a walk," he said, and pulled me towards the door. "I can't go in these shoes," I started to complain. "You'll be okay, it's not that far." "What's not that far?" I asked, suspecting that he had something up his sleeve again. Walter didn't answer, but merely redirected my thoughts to the lovely scenery around us. We walked and walked, but too late. I realized that he wanted to reach the small town of the ocean. Halfway there, my sandals were chafing me already, and by the time we reached the town, I had blisters all over my feet. I wasn't impressed, and the only solution was to buy me some socks and comfortable shoes and lots of Band-Aids. But the torture wasn't over yet. He dragged me up a hill that was protruding into the ocean from where one could have a panoramic 360-degree view of the whole region. And if that wasn't enough, there was the painful walk back. We were told that the distance to the town was 10 kilometers, which means I walked an agonizing 20 kilometers just to buy shoes and socks that I didn't need and to climb up a barren, dusty hill in the ocean. When I complained, he just said, "If you keep putting one foot in front of the other, eventually you will get there." This became somewhat of a family motto when we encountered difficult situations in our lives. The next day, we were driven to the lecture hall where there was a small crowd of strange-looking people in strange outfits. As I hobbled towards the door, they greeted me in Spanish, but all I could say was, "No entiendo." Fortunately, there was a translator for the lectures. After the lecture that Walter presented on the New Age movement, about 10 women came to the front and told him that they were practicing white witches. They said that they knew he was speaking the truth and were eager to learn more. We were overjoyed that the Holy Spirit had penetrated the darkness and enlightened their minds. The church members provided them with material and tapes, and when we had to leave, they were hugging and kissing us and didn't want to let us go. But we had to go. Our next appointment was Australia. But when we arrived at Valencia Airport, another disaster was awaiting us. Evidently, the devil was not happy with us meddling in his occult territory. Workers were striking, and some flights were cancelled, which meant that waiting passengers were strewn all over on the floors of the airport. We were struggling to get our baggage through the mass of legs and sleeping bodies on the floor, and by the time we reached the check-in desk of our flight, it had already closed. We were distraught because we had a connecting flight to Australia, which we couldn't miss. The young lady at the desk then said she would let us onto the plane, but she couldn't guarantee anything. We thanked her and rushed down the Borden Bridge and onto the plane, only to see 2 people sitting on our seats. By now, I was so exhausted and anxious that I burst into tears in front of all the passengers. But the air hostess put a gentle arm around me and said she would try to find us a seat. By another miracle, we got the last 2 seats on the plane. And even though we were separated by dozens of people, we were grateful that we were on our way. Once again, God had prepared the way for us amidst all the efforts of the enemy to stop Walter from reaching our destinations. Australia was very much like the old South Africa we knew. Quaint British-looking houses reminded me of Durban, where I grew up. Being an avid animal lover, I thoroughly enjoyed visiting the koala bears and the kangaroos and feeding the beautiful white parrots in the forests. However, here we encountered once again more trouble from the conferences who were not in favor of Walter speaking in their territory. Church members from different churches were told not to attend the meetings, and apparently even threatened with being disfellowshipped. Although we had by then learned to accept whatever came our way, we are still human, and we had some sleepless nights over how to handle the situation. And of course, jet lag didn't help much either. What contributed to our restless nights even more was the fact that the lady in whose home we stayed was the only member of their family who had accepted the truth. Her husband and 2 children were not in the church. And the first night we arrived at their home, her husband was sitting in the lounge and refused to get up or even greet us. "Don't think you're going to convert me or my children to this sectarian religion," he said. "While you're in my house, there'll be no praying at the dinner table." We didn't answer, and our sister merely turned to show us to our room. On the way there, her daughter came storming into the house and gave us a scowling look with eyes flashing that would melt steel in the middle of the North Pole. She disappeared into her room and closed the door. "Oh dear," the mother said. "I should have warned you. But I was hoping you could speak to my husband and children about the truth. I'm so sorry that they're being so rude." She then told us, in a lowered voice, that her daughter had been acting strangely some 3 days before we arrived and locked herself into her bedroom until the day before. When she had left, the mother ventured into her room and saw the tarot cards lying spread out on the bed with the ominous death card in the middle. "You see, my daughter calls herself a white witch," she almost whispered. I wanted to shout, "Greetings from Spain," but fortunately I kept my mouth shut. That night, we had an eerie feeling crawling up our spines, and we prayed earnestly once more for the Lord's protection over us and our children back home and abroad. We knew that when we were away for the Lord's work, our children would often suffer under the attacks of evil forces. I longed to be with them, to try and save them from the onslaughts that their young minds often did not understand. But I could merely claim the promises that God would take care of them. We also prayed for the family, and especially the young lady, that God would show her the danger of dabbling with the devil and his agents. Isaiah 49, verse 25. "But thus saith the Lord, even the captives of the mighty shall be taken away, and the prey of the terrible shall be delivered. For I will contend with him that contendeth with thee, and I will save thy children." We remained calm and respectful towards the father and his children, and by the end of the lecture series, we were able to sneak in a hug or two with his daughter, which produced a shy smile from her pretty face. The spell was broken, and once again, our Lord, through the power of prayer, had dispelled the evil forces. During this series, Walter was invited to speak at Avondale, the Seventh-day Adventist college in Australia. But first, he was to meet with the scientists in their department, where he presented a summary of all his findings regarding the creation account. To his surprise, most of the lecturers did not agree with Walter on the literal biblical view, and they were adamant not to let Walter speak to the students. His appointment to speak at the opening ceremony of the college was duly cancelled, and after a short tour of the campus, we were taken back to our room, where we wondered what God's purpose was in our visit to the college. In the afternoon, we ventured to the historical home of Ellen White, which was situated a short distance from the campus. Here, we met the curator of the museum, an old, kind gentleman who showed us around. He let me sit at her desk and at her dining room table, which was set with the original crockery and cutlery used by God's messenger while she was living in Australia. Some of her clothing was hanging on the closet door in her bedroom, and I was amazed to see some colorful dresses and not the expected black and white somber clothing portrayed in some of the pictures. I mentioned to the curator that all her little personal items seemed to reflect the sunny atmosphere of the home and the kind, thoughtful personality of the owner, and therefore it was appropriate that the home was called Sunnyside. Then the next minute, the old man burst into tears. "I'm so happy that you came to visit this home all the way from Africa. You know, there's hardly anyone who visits here anymore. No one is interested in the beautiful history of our church and the divine leading of God in those days. Nowadays, they are embarrassed to speak about her. They removed the plaque with her name on the outside of one of the buildings on campus. They also planted some shrubs around her memorial stone that no one can see her name. It is so sad," the man said, as he wiped his tears with a handkerchief. We spoke a few words to encourage the old man, then greeted him and walked back to our room. That evening, Walter received a phone call from the organizer who invited him to speak at the college, who told him that the rector who was to do the opening speech the next morning suddenly had a death in the family and would not be able to be at the event. When the man asked Walter if he would still be available to stand in for the rector, Walter answered that it would be a pleasure to speak to the students. The next morning, when Walter arrived at the hall, the scientists were notably shocked that he was to take the service. They stood huddled in a corner, and after a few minutes, one of them approached Walter and told him that an important event was to take place and that the 40 minutes assigned to his sermon were now reduced to only 10 minutes. Only 10 minutes, Walter thought, but he accepted the challenge and proceeded to rearrange his speech in his head. It turned out that the important event that would take the place of the remaining 30 minutes of the sermon was a rock concert with drums on the stage, while the audience was cheering loudly amidst the bedlam of noise. Coming from a conservative South Africa with its conservative churches, this was a shock to us. In the world we came from, we enjoyed that kind of music. But when we discovered the truth, we realized more and more that such sounds were not in harmony with the sweet, harmonious strains of the heavenly choirs. Music forms a part of God's worship in the courts above, and we should endeavor in our songs of praise to approach as nearly as possible to the harmony of the heavenly choirs. Singing as part of a religious service is as much an act of worship as is prayer. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 594. Also Last Day Events, page 86 and paragraph 4. Then, as the commanding angels strike the note, every hand sweeps the harp strings with skillful touch, awaking sweet music in rich melodious strains. Rapture unutterable thrills every heart, and each voice is raised in grateful praise. Revelation 1, verses 5 and 6, Great Controversy, 1988 version, page 645 and paragraph 3. When his 10 minutes arrived, Walter stood up and told them how he changed from evolutionist to creationist, and that his conversion was based on facts. He continued to make a powerful appeal to the students to not let anyone confuse them with worldly theories contrary to the Bible, and that the biblical creation account could be amply supported with the scientific data available. His appeal led to a standing ovation by the students, but probably created feelings of animosity with some of the others present. After the meeting, an old pastor came up to us and hugged Walter with tears in his eyes, thanking him for preaching the old truth. He told us that he spent his retiring days to encourage the students not to be misled by liberal ideologies and to stick to the ancient paths. We felt encouraged that God had a purpose, after all, with us visiting Australia. A few days before the last lecture of the series, Walter received a phone call from someone in the General Conference. He was invited to attend the International Faith and Science meetings that were to be held in Ogden, Utah, the following week. It was the first in a series described as a dialogue on questions of science and theology that impact Adventist understanding of the biblical account of the origin of life. We were excited to meet all the top scientists and leaders in the church, and a few days later, we arrived at Salt Lake City Airport and were taken by shuttle to the hotel in Ogden where the conference would take place. As we carted our baggage onto the foyer, a man came storming towards us. Thinking that he came to greet us, we smiled and greeted him. Ich esse Fleisch, he yelled angrily in German, which means, I eat meat. We looked at him in utter surprise. Without a word, we checked in at the desk. But as we made our way to the elevator, the man followed us. The doors of the elevator started to close when the insane man stuck his foot in the door so that it would not close, and again shouted at Walter in front of all the people in the elevator, most of them being tourists. Du unde deine blode Ellen White. You and your stupid Ellen White. And that in front of people not of our faith. We were shocked and embarrassed. It was obvious that the man was an Adventist representative from Germany and that he had a serious issue with the spirit of prophecy and with Walter, who defended it. On Sabbath, it was announced that we would visit our brothers and sisters at the Mormon Temple in Salt Lake City. Walter and I looked at each other, and I smiled at the frown on his face that spelled out his indignation. But we said nothing. When we arrived, we were not allowed into the temple, nor allowed to take pictures. But outside in the gardens, the young lady who was our tour guide started telling us about their choir, their outreach, family guidance, and their study programs. When someone asked her what her favorite text in the Book of Mormon was, she said without hesitating, Adam sinned so that man can have joy. Adam sinned so that man can have joy? Did you hear that? This statement glorifies sin, Walter said softly to the General Conference president, who happened to be standing next to him. The president glanced at him disgruntledly, and without a word he turned away and followed the crowd. The next few days shocked us even more. There was a group of theologians and scientists, predominantly from the Euro-Africa, as it was known then, and South Pacific divisions, who strived to make our fundamental belief on the creation account more in line with the theistic evolutionary model. Some of those were the very same scientists we met in Australia and who tried to prevent Walter from speaking to the students at the college. They were against a literal six-day creation and insisted that we accommodate longer ages. Surprisingly absent were the old stalwart defenders of our creation message, with whom Walter had spent many days in the field just a few years earlier. When it seemed that the vote would be in favor of the liberals, my husband was asked to join a group who got together to pray earnestly that they would not succeed in their efforts, but that God's solid Bible truth would have the victory. The next day was the final vote. Delegates were chosen from each division to read to the whole delegation what their division's vote was. Walter felt honored when he was chosen to represent the Southern Africa Indian Ocean Division, and in a loud voice, he announced that he was proud to present to the delegates that his division stood like a rock behind the interpretation that our world was created in 6 literal days. When all had presented their positions, voting commenced, and to the glory of God, the vote was swung to the 6 literal days side. There was commotion on the one side of the conference hall. Suddenly, the same man who confronted us in the foyer jumped up and indignantly pronounced that he did not agree with the vote and that he couldn't present this outcome to his leaders in Germany. Unfortunately for him, he had no choice. God's faithful people had voted the final vote. Once again, God protected his truth, just like he protected the Bible through all the ages. The next day, we greeted some of the people we got to know and got into the shuttle which took us to the airport. Next to Walter sat the representative of Adventist Today magazine, who had given a presentation during the meetings in favor of evolution. He suddenly turned to Walter and asked him what made him, as a scientist, convert to Adventism. It was Daniel chapter 7, he replied. Daniel chapter 7? Why? The man asked, as if he had never heard of it before. Well, it convinced me that the Catholic Church that I belonged to is the little horn that arises out of the 4th beast, and it has all the attributes of the Antichrist. When I realized that they changed the Sabbath to Sunday, I was convinced that this is the truth, Walter explained. The man looked puzzled and was silent for a while. How did you become an Adventist? Walter continued. I was born an Adventist. That's why I keep the Sabbath. But if I were born a Catholic, I would keep Sunday. It's as simple as that, was the man's indifferent answer. Now it was our turn to be puzzled and silent. Was this man serious? After a while, I leaned forward and asked him what was his view on Ellen White's writings. Oh, she was a good old lady, and she wrote some interesting things, but that's all. I started to giggle, because at this point, I thought he was pulling our leg. But the more we spoke, the more we realized that he was dead serious. To Walter's next question about his view on the state of the dead, he was very indecisive about where we go to when we die. Whether we go straight to heaven or sleep in the grave seemed immaterial to him. Now we also understood why he was an advocate of the evolution theory. He didn't believe any biblical truth, and he represented a theological Adventist magazine that was supposed to bring the truth to the world. We wondered what he believed about the sanctuary doctrine, or the three angels' messages, and the health message for our time, but we dared not ask. Our conversation ran dry, and we sat in silence until we reached the airport. From Salt Lake City, we took a flight to Oslo, Norway, where Walter had been teaching Bible classes for a few consecutive years at the European Bible School. We enjoyed the beautiful surroundings on the farm just outside a small town called Skotslev, and met the wonderful students from all over the world. Here, I helped to prepare meals for more than 50 students and staff daily, and we learned how to grow vegetables without tilling the soil and without fertilizers. We visited museums where we could explore the Viking boats and their historical log cabins with whole gardens on the roof, and we walked for miles up the mountains from where we could see the impressive fjords, the multicolored autumn forests, and the vast open spaces with hardly anyone in sight. The first snow started falling, and it was time for us to go home. We were tired, but inspired by all the amazing experiences we had visiting the churches and institutions in the different countries. As I sank down into my seat on the plane, I sighed and said, I'm glad to go home. Walter opened one eye and nodded. But you know what I've been thinking? What? I think we should get out of the city, he said thoughtfully. That's weird, because I've been having the same idea, that we should sell our house and move to the country. We should be growing our own food and get good, clean water. It will have to be somewhere in the mountains, Walter added. He took my hand, and with those thoughts, we fell asleep with the plane droning monotonously across the vast ocean toward the southern tip of Africa. The end of chapter 13 of Dwelling in the Secret Place by Sonica Veith.